Hey guys, Stealth here. Today I have a Wargame replay versus a computer, as this is a newer player. So this is one of his first games, and as such he's not very well versed in wargames. We're here to help him and make him better at the game. Any comment saying what a total noob, what a loser, anything like that will get instantly deleted. That is not what we're here for. Gowtham got this game very recently, and he sent this thing in for reference, asking what can I do better, because there are a lot of different game mechanics at work here, of course. Now, he's training himself up against a computer. You could say that is to some extent the first mistake, because the computer tends to cheat. The computer always gets more income, more unit availability, and just tends to swarm you. Not so much using superior tactics, just superior numbers. A player is always going to try and outmaneuver you or outplay you. The AI just doesn't. So, whereas I understand that you want to train up against the AI, training up against a newer player is easier, safer, and you're going to learn a lot faster. Then, the mode here is Conquest. This means that you're going to have to push, and you're going to have to push hard, because these terrain zones, this is where you get your income from. This is what wins you the game. So your first objective is to figure out, where do I want to go? Do I want to go to set up a defensive line in Charlie and Delta? Do I want to try and push into Echo? Am I going for Foxtrot, or am I going to hold at Bravo? The answer most of the time is going to be Echo. If you have a larger look at the map, you have, for example, for red, you have India, Hotel, and Gulf. For the other side, so blue zone, and in this situation you have Charlie, Delta, Bravo. That leaves Echo and Foxtrot as contested zones. These two are usually the deciding factors in the game, because whoever can get that additional +1, who can get the income from one of, or potentially both of these zones, is going to win the game. So your first objective needs to be, where am I going? Is it going to be Echo, Foxtrot, potentially both? If you're just starting out with the game, I'd say focus on one, because you're going to be busy as is focusing on capturing and holding the zone with your units. And then if you're going for Echo, make sure you set up a defensive line, for example in Delta and Bravo, making sure that Foxtrot is at least contained, so that you're at least playing to hold. This means that all of your forces are supposedly going to Echo first. And yes, not all of your forces, most of them. Of course you want to have some sort of defensive line here. And this tree line in Charlie can perfectly work as a defensive setup. You can have a reconnaissance unit here. You can have a tank or two, maybe an IFV with an autocannon to suppress enemy infantry. Maybe an AA gun, and you should be fine for Charlie. Similarly, Bravo. You know, I have another tree line, but keep in mind that this ridge right here makes it very difficult, if not completely impossible, for units such as tanks and IFVs to shoot down towards this ridge. So from this position they can hit the bridge, but the moment that the unit crosses the bridge and gets over here, your tank that's parked in this tree line is useless. Units that are parked over here can engage everything because they're not blocked by terrain. Now, about his setup, let's see what he deploys and where. He starts out with an iHawk and Alpha. This is not a very good position for a missile system, because there are very few aircraft, let's say they're going for an airstrike on Delta, that are going to continue their way towards Alpha. So your Hawk, while it does have long range, simply does not have the range to hit anything that flies over Delta. Therefore, make sure your anti-air defense is always slightly behind your front line, not too far or they're going to be out of range, not too close or they're going to be instantly killed off. So make sure that you deploy your iHawk, for example, here. This would be a much better position because it's much closer to Delta and can cover more of the front line. Similarly, this tree line can work as a defensive position where the unit is going to be concealed. And from this zone you can cover Delta and a large area of Foxtrot, especially with an iHawk. If you're setting up your defensive missiles in Charlie, I'd say deploy them somewhere along this line, because this line, if you're getting pushed on, is going to be the first to go. And as such, your AA gun or your AA missile system is going to be the first one to get killed. And the missile systems are usually more expensive. Now, if you deploy helicopters, make sure you deploy them over a tree line or over a set of houses, because that means that the helicopter is going to start airborne, and it saves you a couple of seconds for the animation of takeoff. And those couple of seconds, especially if you're going for a competitive or at least multiplayer, those couple of seconds will make a difference in whether your forces get there first or whether the enemy gets there first. Let's speed up deployment a bit. He's going for a couple of M1A1 Abrams on the left flank. He also has a PIVADS over here. Not a bad idea to have a PIVADS in your main spawn, because there can be a helicopter rush. Against a computer, it's not particularly likely, but it's definitely good practice to deploy one of these here for multiplayer matches, because players do helicopter rush every now and then. But if you have this one, then the iHawk really doesn't need to be there. Now he's deploying quite a few tanks. He has 6 M1s, 4 M1s, 2 M1A1s and 1 M1A2. Considering that you're going towards an urban area, that means that these tanks are not really going to be that useful. A tank functions best in the open. So a situation where your tank is parked over here, it can cover most, if not all, of this island and potentially hit towards the other side of the bridge. If you have your tank parked over here, it's going to be blocked for line of sight and as thus line of fire in virtually all directions. Simultaneously, you're making it very easy for enemy infantry to sneak up on your tank. And especially the higher levels of infantry have some really good anti-tank weaponry, meaning that these tanks are not going to be very effective and the enemy infantry is very effective at killing them off. So make sure you don't send that many tanks. Make sure that if you are going to echo, you bring a lot of infantry. That's the main play there. The LAV-AT, we're not quite sure where this thing is going. I definitely wouldn't deploy 3. You could deploy 1 and park it up along this position where it can cover most of the field. Again, do not deploy those into town, because they're not going to be very effective. These missiles require line of sight to the target. And this means that if your target is, for example, let's say you're starting here, you see a tank coming across this crossroads here, and you fire at it. By the time that the tank is behind these buildings, your missile loses line of sight and as such misses the target. And this is going to happen virtually everywhere. So an anti-tank weapon system, not very good over here. It could work in this position or here, where you can intercept most vehicles that are coming your way with an anti-tank missile. Aside from that, he's deploying a couple of PIVADS. Now these things are going to be particularly helpful in keeping your initial convoy safe. If you're dealing with a lot of, or if you're commanding a lot of tanks, then having the PIVADS around is a very good play, because it allows you to shoot down enemy helicopters that might be sent as a counter for your tanks. Just in this situation, the tanks are not that useful, and the PIVADS might run into line of sight issues. So in a situation like this, you could decide to go for more infantry anti-air. So that's the infrared weaponry such as the Stingers in this general US deck. Now he spawns in a couple of helicopters. We got Hueys standing by, a couple of Chinooks. Again, make sure you spawn those over the trees. And these M2A1 Bradleys. I'm not sure exactly where these guys are going to be heading, but wherever they're heading, make sure they start near a road. Units have two different speeds. They have off-road speeds and on-road speeds. Now on-road speeds are always faster than off-road. Doesn't matter the type of vehicle, whether it's wheeled or tracked. So make sure that your vehicles always start on the road. Of course, with the exception of helicopters that are supposed to start over a tree line. This way you don't have to first move at the slower pace off-road, move towards the road and then pick up the speed and start heading towards your objective. Always have these things starting on a road. He's also bringing a couple of mortars and, interestingly, a paladin. Now the paladin has such a range that it can cover most, if, well, in this situation probably not all of the map, but at least a lot of it, from the main spawn zone, so from Alpha. Therefore, I would recommend that you keep your Paladin next to the fob. A Paladin, I believe, comes with an armament of 36 rounds. And these 36 rounds are, especially with the Paladin, fired pretty quickly. Meaning that after those 36 you're going to have to drive it back to the fob before you can fire again. Or you need to send a resupply vehicle, which takes away micromanagement time for the rest of your units. So make sure that you park your Paladin right next to the fob. And I don't mean this close. It can be on the road to make sure that after a shot you can move it around. Or you risk counter battery, so you risk getting shot at in return. And this way you don't really have to worry about the Paladin running out of ammo. He's also spawning in a couple of Cobra AH-1S. Again, spawn them over a tree line, making sure that they don't take too long to get there. We have a Super Cobra and an Apache. Now the Super Cobras, I think that they're not going to be particularly useful in this situation. The Cobras can be, because they could be able to intercept an initial push of enemy infantry or vehicles. The Apache is more of a precision weapon against tanks. And yes, this one of course does come with rocket pods and the M230. But in a situation like this, where you have a town where vehicles can quickly take cover behind buildings, I wouldn't really recommend the Apache. I would recommend investing in infantry much more. We also have a couple of Zippos deployed here. Zippos are very nice tanks, especially in a situation like this. But they don't really get a specific bonus from getting doubled up. It's not like they're going to be more effective. More likely to be the opposite. Because if you have two tanks together, then you risk getting hit. For example, you have one tank being hit by an anti-tank round. Not specifically killing off the tank, but at least wounding it sufficiently to not only have this thing go panicked, but this thing get worried. The closer these things are together, the more that morale damage passes over from one tank to the next. And this will make the units less effective. Let's see, on the other side, we have again a large amount of tanks, a couple of Zippos. I would recommend going with one Zippo if you want to have one in the first place. And I'm not sure where these tanks are going, the M1A1s and the M1s, so let's not pass judgment on those just yet. But if they're going towards the town or delta, then they're not going to be very useful. Infantry is the name of the game in these zones. Tanks really aren't that useful. Now he gets his units moving. He is using fast move, so that's a good thing. Let's see where the right column is going. The helos are spinning up and getting underway. And now the third movement sector is going. We have the mortars moving about and the tanks are moving about. Now there is one unit category that I don't see at all, except for this one. Recon. Without reconnaissance, your units are blind. They don't know what's going on. If you have a unit card up, you can see that down bottom left side it says optics medium. This means that it is not that good at detecting enemy contacts, ranging from infantry to anti-air to tanks, whatever. Some units are even worse. If you look at the Paladin, this thing just has bad optics. And in the case of the Paladin, that's fine. It doesn't need to do its own spotting. But for a tank, you want to have to rely on something that has good, very good, or even exceptional optics to make sure that the tank knows what to fire at. Otherwise, you're going to have to rely on the optics from the tank itself, making sure that the tank first has to see the target and then fire at it. So in a situation like Bravo over here, you could have your tanks, let's see, two set up there, and you have a forward reconnaissance unit over here. This one is going to spot units way sooner than the tanks will, and allow the tanks to fire at them much earlier than if you'd have the tank rely on their own optics. The same goes for the left flank. There is no reconnaissance unit nearby. Reconnaissance is, in this game, one of the most important, if not the most important unit class, because it allows you to react and predict where the enemy is going to move next. And without that information, you're always going to be grasping, and you're always going to be asking yourself, okay, what's going to happen next? Now, he's offloading his helicopters over here. We have a couple of smalls, we have some, what is that, Delta? Yeah, Delta Force, and some Stingers. This is a very, very defensive deployment, and it's going to take the infantry a long time to get to where they need to go. Now, in this phase of the battle, as you can see, the enemy does not have any anti-air near the position where you might want to offload your helicopters, although they are maneuvering an I-Hawk into position. If you want to deploy your units in a town like this, either make sure you bring them with wheeled vehicles, because those are the fastest. You could bring them with the Bradleys, because they carry the Bushmaster and at least have some sort of defense. Or you use your helicopters and you land them on this side of the water. This is going to save your infantry quite a bit of time, because of course the helicopters are going to be much faster than the infantry ever will be. So this deployment, this early, is not really going to get him anywhere. And by the looks of it, he's taking up positions here in Delta. That looks to be the direction where the Stingers and the Smalls are going. Now, considering that this is a conquest game, that means that the objective is to capture and hold as much terrain as possible. So your first order of business should be getting your units into forward positions, not necessarily bringing out a command vehicle right away. That's going to be something that you can do later on, especially in multiplayer. It's practice to first get as much terrain as possible and then start making your way there with command vehicles. So just get your units into position. Now he has his Stingers over here, and this does make a pretty strong position against aerial units, because he has his Stingers over here and 2 Pivads. But it leaves the left awfully vulnerable. Charlie has 0 defenses. Now, you did see probably the Block 52s fly over. They went for the helicopters. I believe they did they take down the Apache? Is that the Apache? Yeah, that's the Apache. So they took down the Apache, and you're not really going to see too many people just coming in with 2 Block 52s and killing off your helos like that. In this case, you could argue, well, the I-Hawk was effective in Alpha, but this is more the exception than the rule. Over to the right, he has 1 reconnaissance unit. He has the longbow. From its current position, it can probably spot something. It's just not that much that's going to be seeing in this area. The longbow, with its exceptional optics, is a very, very good and as such very expensive reconnaissance unit. And by deploying the longbow here, as well as a large amount of rather expensive tanks, you have deployed a lot of points in this zone. And this is a zone that's not really going to see that much action. Make sure that you have your biggest investment in points in an area where you want to attack. So that could be, in this situation, Echo. Now, don't take after the computer's example of quad stacking units, so that's having 4 units in one group, whether it's infantry or tanks. It just doesn't work that well. Make sure you split these up, and therefore make sure that you have multiple groups of, for example, 2 units together. Now, this is where the enemy longbow comes into play. It already kills off 1 M1A1. The M1A2 is in a position where it's at least covered by the factory here. There goes the other M1A1. Super Cobra dashes forward, trying to kill off the longbow. Immediately runs into the I-Hawk, and by this point, if you're going up against a player, he could already have deployed anti-air infantry here, so Stingers or something along his variety of it. And of course the longbow survives because of RNG mostly. The missiles just didn't hit. The Cobras are dashing forward, trying to deal with the AA guns. The AA guns take out the helicopters. The Cobras take quite a bit of damage. Pivads punishing the Cobra, and the AI was apparently aware of Delta Force here and decided to go for a large napalm strike on the position, forcing Delta out of this group, out of these buildings here, or at least slightly. Now, Delta Force is very good at dealing with enemy infantry at short range. They're not fantastic at dealing with infantry at longer range, because the M60E3 is mostly a short range weapon. And therefore, a position like this can work, but it's not likely to see a lot of infantry. Try rushing your infantry to a position over here next time, because you can see that the AI is already deploying a Bradley. For some reason they decided to not bring the riflemen. They're on the other side of the bridge. But you could easily take out the Bradley using the anti-tank weaponry from the Delta Force or the own weapon system of the Bradley to take out the Bradley and then keep hold of this area. So, to sum up for now, no defense in Charlie, too much invested in Bravo without reconnaissance except for the longbow, but there are units that can do reconnaissance jobs way cheaper, and an over-investment in Delta, which is not aggressive enough. Make sure you try pushing for the middle of the map ASAP. And you can see that the computer has captured quite a bit of terrain. Their presence is actually still really light, as they only have one group of riflemen, one Bradley, one AA unit. They're coming in with a quad stack of infantry, a couple of tanks here, but nothing really too severe. Their flank here is being moderately defended, but they don't have a lot of reconnaissance. So if you wanted to, you could sneak around with a couple of helicopters. And the AI is even so brazen that they're bringing a command vehicle forward. And judging by its direction, I'd say they're probably going to try and capture Charlie. And of course, if it's not opposed, that's going to put them at even more of an income for their conquest points. Now their defensive setup here in Juliet is interesting. They have the Eyehawk. I'm not exactly sure why they decided to deploy an Eyehawk here. It's not a bad strategy, I just wouldn't pick this unit to defend it. They also have one group of Riflemen 90 and a Bradley here in these buildings, in case there is some sort of incursion from the right flank. You can still very easily go around. Just bring your units, for example infantry, through these woods and attack from the flank. And that's really all the defenses that they have over there. Now he's pushing with the Cobras, doing a bit of damage using the rockets, not really that much. And while the infantry is a bit concerned, they're perfectly fine. At some point, the Bradleys are going to be in range right about now, and going to start to return fire on the Cobras. This is something that the Cobras simply cannot do anything against, except for backing up. Now this is where the tank becomes useful, the M1 that's parked over here. It does do some damage, just not a lot. And the smalls are still moving around. Make sure you put your smalls in a situation like this in a building right here, because they would have taken out the Bradleys very, very quickly. Now he brings forward his LEV-AT. I can understand why, because he wants to try and kill off the Bradleys here. But the LEV-AT is a very weak vehicle. It only has one armor on every side. It really requires one or two hits from the Bushmaster that's mounted on these Bradleys to get killed off. And the anti-tank vehicles are best at their maximum range, 2625 meters. Because at that range, the units that can actually return fire at them are very, very low. Only tanks with ATGMs, some helicopters of course can go hunting for them. Tanks with ATGMs, ATGMs mounted on infantry or carried by infantry, and in this situation the ITO could return fire. But in this situation, the LEV-AT, this close, it's going to get wiped out instantly. By some miracle, they haven't found it yet. Now this is another problem. We have riflemen inside the building over here. You don't know exactly where they are, but you can see, actually we do. They're inside this building. That means that they are right close to the tank. Now for an anti-tank weapon mounted on infantry, it doesn't really matter how close they are to the tank. The devastation will always be the same. And especially with the AT-4, right now the infantry here gets a side shot at the tank. And meaning its side is only armored with 9 points of armor, far fewer points of armor than its front, and therefore much, much easier of a target. Let's see the infantry. Where'd they go? Oh, they're jumping around. That's actually rather lucky. The infantry had a perfect opportunity to take out the M1A2 and just get this high value unit out of the way. An M1A2 is the pinnacle of tank warfare, and make sure you keep those things in the open. And I don't mean park them right there. Park them in a position where they can overwatch an open field. Now you can see that he just did not have enough infantry here, because right now the riflemen are already chewing through his stingers. We do have a couple of Abrams, an Apache, and a couple of small guys trying to help out wherever they can. But it's just not enough. And at this point another couple of Eyehawks comes in, takes out again the helicopter that's trying to assist here. The Smalls finally get some damage in, dealing a killing blow to the Bradley there. But at this point the Stingers are virtually surrounded and really are not likely to survive. So more infantry here. Now he pushes forward with the Zippos, good move. They won't be able to save your Stingers because you cannot fire at the same building your Stingers are in. You could go for the Riflemen, but here's the thing. The Riflemen have a range of 700 meters. You have a range of 1050 meters. So you don't need to get this close. If you are standing off, let's say about here, you're probably going to be in range. And from over here, you can engage them without them engaging you, making it a lot safer for your units and significantly raising their chances of survival, at least from these units, not regarding any other units that might be in the area. Now, he has captured Charlie, he's captured Bravo. Watch this CV. That is just driving in unopposed, or, well, it seems that the AI is still considering what to do with this command vehicle here. Make sure you have, I'm not going to say a 360 defense, but at least a defense along your flanks. Because this could have very, very quickly ended the game if you were dealing with a player. A player, even if they sent out, let's say, a probing force, so a couple of Bradleys, maybe a reconnaissance unit, they could have easily passed through Charlie, driven right into Alpha, searched for your command vehicle, killed it off, and won the game. That's how fast they could have done it. So make sure you defend Charlie just as well as you are defending Bravo. Just make sure you position these units a bit better, because this is what I pointed out earlier. From over here, they're not really going to be effective at killing off anything on the lower ground. Now another large napalm strike apparently came in. At this point the AI is also using thunderbolts. A bit of artillery seems to strike these Stingers. That seemed to be friendly fire from the Paladin. We finally got... actually, it's mortars. Yeah, it's a mortar and a Paladin. We finally got rid of the infantry here. The AI is already bringing in a new group of infantry here. The Bradley may be heavily damaged, but the infantry is still 10 for 10. And we have a couple of Abrams coming in from the right flank here. Now this is a pretty nice opportunity to either send in your own Thunderbolt, disregarding the Chaparral and the Eyehawk here, or to have positioned an anti-tank weapon, let's say, right about here. One of those LEV ATs could easily wipe out at least a couple of these tanks before the tanks either got into range or the unit got killed off by something else. So from over here, an anti-tank weapon would be useful. Going up against these guys with a helicopter right now would be rather dangerous. Especially considering that with our perfect information, we know that there's a Chaparral, we know that there's an Eyehawk, actually 3 Eyehawks and a Pivats here. From over here, you're probably still safe. And from over here, this one, the longbow, could easily wipe out all of the helos without any risk to itself. Now he's bringing in a couple of little birds. I think to counter the infantry. But really, if you're operating this close to the front line, make sure you do a sweep with a SEAD aircraft. This is SEAD, Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses. These things kill off, or at least seek out and then kill off, enemy radiation sources. So radar-guided units, such as everything that has the R symbol there. AA missiles, AA guns, those are the favorite targets of the SEAD, and that's the only thing they can target. If you do a flyover with one of those, you can wipe out at least a couple of them, and make it much, much safer for your helicopter operations. Also, something I'm not seeing is a constant stream of units. Especially in Conquest, you usually tend to have a lot of income for reinforcements, but he's not really spending them. Maybe he's buying a couple of units here. He has the Thunderbolt. But if you look at what the AI is bringing in, and yes, you could argue the AI is not really the perfect example because the AI just tends to get a lot more income and spam. The AI is bringing in more tanks, they're bringing in MBT-70s again, Bradleys, which they're offloading in the completely wrong position. You want to have a consistent stream of reinforcements going towards the area that you're fighting in, or the area where you want to start pushing. At this moment, Gowtham is not doing either of those. He's not bringing reinforcements to Delta or setting up a new defensive position to make sure that he can hold off the units where they're going to be heading next. So make sure you keep bringing in units. And especially with your reconnaissance, try and bring as much to counter the enemy as possible. Now, let's do a little experiment here. This is what Gowtham can see. A couple of units here and there. Now, we don't quite know what this is. We could just see it's an infantry group. We know that they have something over here. That looks to be a Bradley that dug itself into a building. Actually, is that a Bradley or a one with... Sorry, that's a Pivads. If you're wondering how I can tell, you can just about make out the radar targeting system right over there on the side of the turret. And aside from that, you can see the 163 minigun or autocannon or whatever you want to call it right there sticking out through the building. He also knows about these Abrams, of course, and he knows that we have a Bradley over here. That's what he can see. Now, what can the computer see? The computer can see what tanks he has over here. He can see that there's something going on over here. You can see that there is a landed helicopter there, which is a Black Hawk, so it's not particularly dangerous. And aside from that, he cannot see anything. Now, that is because the AI, by the looks of it, is making the exact same mistake. Unless the deck is wrong. I'm not sure, but judging by how little recon the AI is deploying, and considering that they're only deploying a longbow themselves too, I'm thinking that the deck that he's using might not have any reconnaissance units in it. That could be a significant part of the problem. And that could be why the AI is not deploying any reconnaissance either. So that is going to be a massive point of importance. Make sure you bring your reconnaissance units. They are, once again, one of the, if not the most important unit in the game category or in the decks that you have. Because without them you're blind. You don't know what to do, you don't know how to attack, you don't know where to attack, you don't see the opportunities. Now, there we go, that's a kill on one of the anti-air systems. The other one, Chaparral, is infrared. Cannot be killed off by the anti-radiation missiles that are going to hit, for example, the Ihawk and the 163 we just took out, the Pivads. Chaparral does not have a radar, it's infrared, but it is capable of shooting down helicopters at decent range. At this point he brings in another Apache. This was the Apache he ordered a couple of minutes ago. You can already see a missile coming out from the Chaparral. He just saw his first helicopter go down. If you do, make sure you bring an expensive helo like this, 120 points, back. You do not want to risk it. It is too valuable to lose. It gets hit once and gets hit... Fortunately not. There we go. I was hoping that he was able to take out the Chaparral, but he just didn't take it out at all. Now again, a look. We know that they are bringing in riflemen. That's because the Rangers are still right next to their Black Hawk. We have eyes on another Bradley and a Chaparral, and we have no idea what's going on in Delta. The AI similarly probably doesn't have a clue what's going on, because they're just as blind as he is. But this is going to be the problem. No recon, in this case either side has no recon, it's just gonna mess you up. Probably in a move of desperation he starts pushing with the Abrams, as well as the Zippos and maybe a mortar for support. Seems that the mortar's not quite sure where to go yet. By the looks of it, these tanks are not fast moving. They're just moving across the terrain. Now this is a rather risky move. It can pay off, but the chances of it paying off are rather low. Because if you're up against a player, they're going to have ATGMs sticking out of virtually every building here, so that's the longer range anti-tank weapon. And they might have some short range anti-tank infantry over here. Think SMAs, or for example just standard infantry with their AT4, which are going to be waiting for your tanks just to come into range. If that's the case, you're screwed. You're also going to be screwed if they send in a Thunderbolt, if they send in their longbow, because you have no AA whatsoever. If you send out tanks or any other units, make sure they always have some sort of AA umbrella with them. Otherwise, you're going to find these things dead very, very quickly. Now, he's also bringing his mortar forward, very, very far, I must add. A mortar is an artillery support unit. It's not there to be this close to the front line. This position is okay because it can cover most of the area. This position is way too aggressive. Because yes, the shells might be arriving very soon, but that's just about all you can say. Now, let's go have a look at his deck, because I think that that's where the problem lies. So let's import the deck. And Gowtham. Where are you at? Here you are. Okay, let's see. He has 7 command vehicles, 1 fob, 4 resuppliers and 1 Hammett. This is not a bad setup. I'm gonna not change anything here. You could argue that for a conquest game, having command infantry is very, very useful, but you only get 3 of them. So you're gonna have to free up another slot somewhere else. Infantry. We have some infantry and it's all too expensive. That's the problem here. If you have a match against a player, you're going to see that they tend to spam infantry. They tend to keep throwing infantry at you, and that's because they don't have a lot of high-priced infantry. Your cheapest infantry unit is, if you want to call it an infantry unit, 40 points. That is way too expensive. If you're going with, for example, standard riflemen, just in an infantry versus infantry role, and even there these guys aren't very good, but at least they're going to be holding the line to some extent, then sending an infantryman or rifleman in Humvees, it's going to cost you 20 points. So you can deploy 2 squads of these for 1 squad of these. And yes, the twin UE might be nice. It's fast, it can get to its destination a bit faster, but it's also not particularly capable of supporting. So it's really only 20 points you're paying for speed and nothing else. The Rifleman 90 in their Bradleys are 40 points. Again, very expensive. Deltas are allowed to be expensive, but at 55 I find them too expensive. I would switch these around for the Humvees. Because if you're bringing in Delta Force, you're usually going to be looking for these guys to kill off enemy infantry, which is probably already entrenched in a building, and as such you don't really need to fly them in. So Humvees. The Rifleman 90, I like the Bradleys. For an urban map such as the one you just saw, they're not great. They can work, but they're generally too expensive. I would recommend switching them to Humvees, or if you really absolutely want the Bradley, go for the M2. Because the M2A1 is another 5 points more expensive. And you're really not getting that much of a stat change. You're getting 10% more power, or 10% more accuracy on the missile and the gun, a little bit more power on the missile, and 1 point more on the gun. So I'd say either pick the Bradley or the Rifleman 90 in a Humvee. The Stingers, not particularly useful in a Huey. Again, go with a cheap transport, because it allows you to deploy more units. And the SMAs, I would recommend to deploy those in the LVTP-7A1, because they're some of the few units that can do that. And these things are quite heavily armored and come with a grenade launcher, which is very potent against enemy infantry, either entrenched or out in the open. Supports, we have quite a few. 9 Pivads, we have some Eyehawks, some Chaparrals, a couple of Paladins and some Mortars. This is good. Tanks. We have 2 M1A2s, a couple of M1A1s, some M1s, and the MBT-70. The M1 Abrams at 65 points is a decent all-rounder. Very accurate gun, 65%. AP, slightly lacking. Let's see the ERA. Yeah, it's just as bad. Only 15 points. And then the MBT 70. This is a rather good tank for urban warfare. It's not too expensive, and it comes with an autocannon, which is going to have far more suppression damage than, for example, the machine guns from the M1A1. And then again, you don't want these things too close to your town anyway. You could also bring the M8 AGS. This is a nice and very lightly skinned tank. Very quick, fires very quick, and has a decent punch for 55 points. For now, I'd say that for a general deck, this is not a terrible setup. It can work. Reconnaissance. And this is where the fun starts. He has 2 longbows. Now these things are pretty much mandatory in a deck like this. 4 M4A3 Bradleys, M3A2s. Good units. Pretty overpriced, because you're not likely to get 80 points out of them. And if you're just going hunting for information, if you just want to have, for example, a picket, so a unit that's just going to be on the outer perimeter and just looking at what's coming towards you, go for something way cheaper, such as the Humvee. You can deploy 5 Humvees for the price of 1 Bradley. And aside from that, you only have 4 Bradleys, making them rather indispensable, because they just are that expensive and you don't have that much replacement power. If I lose 1 Humvee, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it, because we have 13 of these available. And in this case, I would pick the 40mm grenade launcher. The 134 minigun does work, but I find that the frag launcher just tends to work a bit better, especially in a town like this. Then we have SEALs and we have Rangers. It depends a bit on how you want to deploy the Navy SEALs. You can go 2 roles with these. You can either have them as behind-the-line operators and trying to find high-value targets, or as short-range anti-infantry weapons. So as short-range infantry brawlers. And they are very good in that role. But again, if you're going to bring in something as specialistic as SEALs, make sure you don't put them in a twin Huey. Because in that case, you are likely already engaged with the enemy. And bringing them in a twin Huey is not safe. So make sure you bring them in a V150 for a bit of protection. Or if you want to go extra cheap, for the M35 or the Humvee. Humvee is very quick. Does not cover anything for defense. The V150 at least has some defense. And the V150 itself is a reconnaissance vehicle. So for 50 points you get both a squad of SEALs and you get the V150 recon vehicle. The Rangers in the Black Hawk, these can work. They're nice and, well, moderately cheap. You can deploy these things pretty much all over the battlefield, in a position where a Humvee might get detected. Because the Humvee only has medium stealth, and the Rangers have very good stealth. So they're much more difficult to detect. Vehicle tab. We have a couple of Zippos. We have the the LEVAT, the Comvats, and the CEVs. In this case, considering that I only have Humvees, I'm definitely going to be keeping the Comvats, because these guys can very dangerous units with their autocannons. The LEVAT can work. Humvees potentially a bit better, because it can get out of a position. Actually, they're just as fast, never mind. The Zippos are good units, and the CEVs. The CEVs and the Zippos have a slight overlap in capability. They are both anti-infantry weapon. The Zippo, of course, with napalm. The CEV, again, going for killing off infantry. They're both useful in a town fight. I'd argue that the CEV is slightly more useful. So we're going to delete the Zippo, and this frees up another couple of activation points. You could spend those activation points on the LEV-25 FSV. This fire support vehicle, is what FSV stands for, can use its Bushmaster, as well as its mobility to quickly punch through enemy lines, and just try and find out what you can run up against. basically. You could also say, well, I want to have those in this tab. That's in the form of the LAV-25 Scout. These things are better, they're just less numerous. Just compare the two. They are exactly the same vehicle, but this one has good optics versus poor optics and medium stealth versus poor stealth. And considering we do have 3 points, I would recommend going with the FSV, or sorry, the LAV-25 here. So just bring 13 of those and you have some more autocannons which can also do spotting. Then we have the helos. We got the Super Cobra with the TOW 2 and the anti-radiation missile or the anti-radar missile. A couple of Cobras. We have Little Birds and Apaches. Works for me. For air we have the Block 52, the Thunderbolt and the Phantom. I haven't seen these being brought in at all, but that's not a bad thing because they would have been killed off very, very quickly. The helos. I would like to bring in a Prowler or a Raven to deal with enemy anti-air units, but we simply don't have the points, nor do I really see where we could free up the points. I would not go with the Thunderbolt, because the Thunderbolt tends to get shot down too easily. If you're dealing with a high value tank, you could try and take it out with the Nighthawk. You could try and take it out with the Hornet. The Hornet being more effective at taking out tanks. The Nighthawk can do it, but sometimes tanks just survive. The Nighthawk though is slightly more survivable than the Hornet. But in this case I am going to go with the Hornet, because you get 2 of them versus only 1 of the Nighthawk. And then I'm going to replace the Phantom with an actual bomber, because we don't have anything that can, for example, quickly fly around the edges of the map and kill off an artillery target on the other side. And by an artillery target I mean something that is an artillery unit. And the Eagle, the F-15D Eagle, also known as the Deagle, is a rather, or actually a very good platform for that. You get 1 of them, so make them count. Do not throw these units away for killing off 20 points of infantry, it's not worth it. Try and go after high value targets. And medium value targets, you can smash those with the Paladin. I'd recommend you try again with this deck. And just go against some players. You could try 10v10, see how it works there. Just to practice with the units, practice with the deck, practice with pushing. Or go against 1v1s, but make sure you vet the enemy player first. So you click on their name, see how many matches they've played, and make sure you don't go up against some sort of super hardened seasoned veteran, because they're going to be really difficult to defeat. And while you are going to get your ass kicked repeatedly learning this game, it is always more interesting if you at least get a couple of wins in every here and there, because it will keep up your confidence. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Let me know what your recommendations are for Gowtham down below. Again, derogatory or negative comments, not welcome. Just the constructive stuff that I have grown accustomed to from you guys. Thank you for watching. Hope it was useful. Gowtham, I hope I helped you out with this video. And if you have any further questions, leave those down in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you soon for more videos.